Hello everyone, Derail here, and today I'm going to be doing sort of a review or sort of a first impressions of Sphere of Influence, which is the newest Victoria 3 DLC. And I'm going to come out of the gate with the title of this video being what it is. I think this DLC is a huge success for Paradox. I think it is a huge success for Victoria 3 as a game, and I think it does the thing that most people wanted it to do, which is make the game actually enjoyable on repeat playthroughs. I've played through one full run of the British Republic, or British Empire pretty much, and as you can see I have a lot of the world in my power block as soon as it loads. I've gotten pretty far with this. I've added all the principles obviously, and the Republic, the Empire is pretty big, 1.1 billion GDP, 308 million population, I've annexed India, things like that. And the number one thing I will say that this DLC has done is add a lot of flavor both for your country and also for AI countries. AI is generally way more aggressive, and I think that can be seen with two things. Number one, there was the Chingsplosion, which doesn't usually happen in the regular game, but not only was there a Chingsplosion, but there was also a bunch of conquest going on here. Spain actually owns part of China, and they own this area as well, and then they got kicked out of there. And the other thing I wanted to show you is Venezuela here. I have not interacted with Venezuela like at all this entire game, but as you can see, they've went on a conquest spree, kind of taken over a bunch of land, and it's really crazy to see something like this in this game. I know that sounds kind of silly, but stuff like this doesn't usually happen in Victoria 3, and the fact that it can now, I consider an unequivocally good thing. Something else I wanted to mention is that now laws in general have a lot more impact and flavor to them. For example, laissez-faire isn't just like the best law in the game anymore. There's reason to go for things like agrarianism or interventionism. For example, laissez-faire disables the ability to force privatization, or it also disables nationalization, which is pretty important as a feature if you want to try to like make the most income early game. I could see other people like utilizing an intervention or agrarianism setup and just like planting a bunch of like opium fields all over China and just going absolutely ballistic with that. Speaking of which, I really do like all the mechanics when it comes to like putting buildings in other countries. I didn't know how it was going to be implemented at first. I thought it was going to be kind of silly, and it didn't end up actually being silly at all. It feels super important to the game, so much so that it's like shocking that we went this long without it. I know that's kind of a pedantic way to phrase it, but I really do love the way this has been implemented. I love the company portfolios. I love looking at seeing all of the profits that my people are making because of it, and just seeing, your country extract the resources of the world and do economic imperialism in a very clear and obvious way. In terms of the AI, they've just generally been way more aggressive, which has made the game a lot more fun. Obviously, if I'm playing, British Republic, I'm going to destroy Russia, and you really can just kneecap them early on, but they'll also fight back. I've gone into like 7 or 8 wars with them, and there was at one point I was trying to like do something with Spain and Catalonia here, which I released from Spain, and Russia just like joined the war instantaneously the moment I added Catalonia as a war goal, and they've been like my rival throughout the entire game. And I know that sounds like a very obvious game mechanic, and that does happen at some points in like 1.6 as well, but I feel like in 1.7 these types of things are a lot more common and happen with a lot more frequency, which is really nice to see in general. Like Persia, for example, taking out Kandahar over here, taking out Turkmenia as well, just going for that land. Just seeing stuff like this is super unusual for this game, and I really love it to death, so excellent job there. In terms of other stuff going on, I really do think the principal groups are amazing. I swapped Creative Legislator when I needed to pass Multicult, and Multicult is like the strongest thing for this type of build if you're playing like a British Empire that's taken over the rest of the world. So swapping that out and seeing like an immediate huge effect in the ability for me to pass laws was so nice. I love the cohesion mechanic. I love that there isn't like a huge negative debuff the moment you go below like 50 cohesion. I like that there are negatives. Obviously, you do want to have that cohesion up, but it really doesn't matter for your gameplay if you just get unlucky and you have like a really rebellious puppet that is just like inflating that cohesion value, or decreasing it rather. In terms of the principal groups, I imagine that a lot of them are going to end up being really good. If I go to the list with all of them, I like Creative Legislator. I believe that Advanced Research has the potential to be really solid. Some of the other ones are like not the greatest. Like I don't really think police coordination is that crazy, all things considered. Food standardization is probably going to be underrated by a lot of people. Colonial offices was pretty alright. I was running it at the beginning of the game. And I really think that foreign investment might not be that bad, all things considered, but that depends on, like, you have to not be running laissez-faire if you want to be using this. Sacred Civics is also pretty nice, all things considered. Just if you want to go for a, taking all the countries and making them your religion, you can absolutely do that now. It just adds a lot more flavor to the game that it really did need. And it does so in a way that doesn't just feel like stat bloat, even though that is objectively, like, what it is. I love that countries are also able to create their own, power blocks later in the game. Starting off, with the same, like, five. Actually, the Ottoman Empire fell apart, so Turkey's is gone. But, the Grand Alliance here, you have the United Front with America, which totally a name they would pick. I think that this is a very interesting way to make repeated playthroughs just feel more generally interesting. Prestige is the same as before, but it feels like it has more of a reason behind it now. Because if you just knock somebody out of that great power level and you knock them down to a major power, well, not only does that have effects if you're playing as Britain for the great game, but it also has effects on their power block, which is just yet another reason why you would want to, as a major power or great power, just kneecap countries whenever possible, which is why I did that to Russia. As you can see, I released pretty much everybody, and also to France, and also to Spain down here. Going more specifically into the Great Game itself, I've got to say I'm a little less impressed about it than I was about some of the other parts of the update. It does feel like a solid addition, and I do like it. I just feel like it's way too Britain-sided right now. In real life, the Great Game was very much inconclusive. There wasn't really a clear victor. And you can just completely kneecap Russia within, like, 2 wars if you just release a bunch of states from them. And I guess you could do the same as Russia if you get through to Britain, but I feel like it's much harder for that to happen, and I feel like if AI is doing this, Britain will always win. And that's just because there's also a ticking modifier depending on how much, like, GDP you have. And I feel like it's a little too strong because at the start of the game, of course Britain is going to have an advantage. They have the worldwide empire already. They already have a more industrialized starting position. And they also have better technology, better literacy, and things like that. The ticking modifier is super strong. Sometimes could be as high as, like, negative 0.5 per month. And that feels a little much, in my opinion. I would like to see it based much more on the warfare of the region. If Russia's able to go down here, get a protectorate on Persia, then, they can actually stand a chance of winning. But I imagine for most AI games, either the conflict won't end, or if it does, it'll end with a British victory. In order for the conflict to end, I feel like this is a little bit weird as well. You need to actually, like, have all of the areas within certain regions be part of a power block. This includes Central Asia, Persia, and the Caucasus. Now, I don't really know why that's the case. Like, I feel like Sichuan and the military revolt, where it is here in Uyghurstan as well, it doesn't really need to be part of the Great Game as much. I understand the concept they're going for, and I understand why splitting it up feels a little weird, but the fact that they start as a part of Qing kind of throws into question Russia's original starting position, because you really don't want to be super antagonistic towards Qing at the beginning of the game, especially now if you can just get, resources and stuff within them. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I would love to see that change to just be the parts of, like, the Khanate over here, Khiva, Bukhara, and Kokland. Maybe I'm, like, misguided on this. Maybe there is a logical reason why that is the case. I'm certain I'll get a comment if that is. But for gameplay reasons, I feel like it should be much more relegated to this area, rather than also making you have to take this area unless you want to knock people out of being a great power, which is what I did in my game. They're a major power now, which I've got to say, pretty interesting. In terms of other things I want to talk about, I love the leverage mechanic. Just being able to see it on your map, it just feels like another thing to go for. And I feel like that's what Victoria 3 really needed, was more things to go for, which, great job on that. Obviously, I can, do things like invite other countries to my power block if I really wanted to, but I feel like at this point in the game, if you're looking at my power block, it's, like, about as strong as it reasonably can get with pretty decent cohesion, so I'm pretty happy with the state of things. In terms of issues, there were a couple things I wanted to mention here. The first was that Russia just seems like they'll never win the Great Game, which I feel like is a little bit of a problem. The second thing I wanted to talk about more generally is that there were some bugs at game release, and that just is a normal thing with Paradox, and that's not really that unusual. For example, I didn't experience very many crashes, so I'm not too concerned about stuff like that. But there were some issues with like ideological unions not properly functioning, and they were just dropping cohesion like crazy. Another thing that they added was the ability for a, unrecognized nation. Let's just say you're playing as like Cookland over here, right? They're unrecognized. In order to get recognized, you no longer can just like claim it as part of a GP war. You have to actually get Civilizing Mission, which is a tier 3 tech. And I don't know why they did that, and I don't know why you can't just like get it with nationalism, which just feels like the much more obvious choice. Maybe I'm just stupid because nationalism is used for a lot of other stuff in the game, but the fact that people have to wait now if they're playing an unrecognized power, they have to wait so long in order to get a diplomatic option to do so, it just feels not great when most unrecognized powers aren't going to be able to get that tech until like the 1880s at the earliest. Maybe a little before that, maybe the 1860s or 70s, but regardless, I feel like that's just wasting the 30 years of game start that people could use to rush towards that, recognized goal. Also, in terms of getting recognized, you can't do it in Warfare at all anymore. I feel like that's just a misstep. If you're playing as Qing and you just completely obliterate the British in the Opium Wars, you should get recognized. Like, I just don't understand why that's not the case. Maybe there's some gameplay reason as to why they wanted to remove that functionality, but I personally don't understand it. If it's too easy, that's, like, fine. But also, like, in real life, the British didn't do this to the world. So it's kind of unreasonable to base things off of whether the player can do it or not, you know? But aside from the fact that I feel like, unrecognized stuff isn't really the greatest, I really do consider this DLC to be a massive success. If you're playing any of the, like, bigger countries, it's going to be 10 times more enjoyable for you, and that's at a low end. I played around 375 hours of Vicky 3. I know this was kind of rambly so far, but I really do think this is one of the best things that Paradox has dropped in the last, like, decade. I put it up there with things like No Step Back for Hearts of Iron 4, some of the Stellaris revamps as well. Like, it's really, really good, and I highly recommend it. I haven't even gone into, like, all the features and things like that. There's a lot of silly stuff you can do. You can, like, I saw somebody play as, like, Britain or whatever, and they forced Japan to become, like, Catholic. There's just silly stuff. I think they were playing as the Pope, but yeah. There's a lot of silly stuff you can do now. The game is generally more flavorful. There's a lot more activity in the world as well. It feels much more like a world. There's a lot more player depth. And I really think that's the two things that were lacking the most. The world felt dead, and the player couldn't really express themselves through gameplay, and now they very much can do so. So, huge W for Paradox for doing that and making that, a thing. I've got to say, I'm just very happy that this didn't turn out to be a complete and total flop. I imagine it's going to get some negative reviews from people who are just mad about, like, performance and stuff like that, which, by the way, performance generally is pretty alright. Like, this is 1926, 1.1 billion. The only other issue in terms of performance that I've had is that when you're going to a building and you want to, like, expand it, you have to wait in this kind of middle menu for, like, 5 to 10 seconds, whereas before it was nearly instant. I believe that's because it's calculating all the earnings potential and all the other areas of the world where you can, like, place buildings, but I feel like it could just be separated out, maybe into a separate menu if you want to look for not just domestic and abroad, but just domestic only states. But at the same time, maybe that's just not the problem, and I don't know what I'm talking about. Hopefully we see something, fixing that soon. Economic dependence is great. I love the lobby system. Oh my gosh, I didn't even cover the lobbies. The lobbies are great. These save your life when it comes to having, like, a revolution. For example, I was dealing with a revolution when I was trying to pass Multicult, and I was trying to prevent, I believe it was the industrialists from, actually it wasn't the industrialists, it was the petit bourgeois. I was trying to prevent them from starting a revolution against me. And I noticed that they had a political lobby down here. I think they were in, wasn't anti-Spain, it was the anti-Russian League. So I was like, alright, I'll just ball out and declare war on the Russia and just take as much stuff from them as possible and just cause as many, negative things to them to happen as possible. And it was just really, really worthwhile. It immediately made the revolution have no legs to stand on. And I like that gives you an alternate, like, foreign policy way to prevent a like domestic revolution. And domestic revolutions can really kick your ass now. Like if you're running a huge power block, it could be really bad if you have a revolution. So there's a lot more logical reason as to why a player would want to avoid that outcome, whereas previously there wasn't really, and you could just be like, all right, I'm just gonna, have a revolution happen for fun because I want to get this law passed. So it really does good from a game balance perspective as well, which is really nice to see. I think I'm going to wrap up here because I don't really know what else to say. I'm definitely going to be making more videos of various sorts on this channel, so stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed this pretty rambly little rant. I'm just really happy with the state of things in Victoria 3 at the minute. I would love to see more content in the near future focused on maybe fixing up some more things with the Navy system, particularly I feel like is a little rough at the minute. And then after that, you can do a lot more flavor when it comes to different countries, because now I feel like we have an excellent, groundwork here. Like, I didn't do a lot of this stuff over here. I didn't do a lot of the stuff down here. And the world still looks like crazy different than in our timeline, which is great. I think that's a huge thing. Like, if I go down here, you can see Austro-Hungarian East Indies, which is, like, absolutely absurd. I don't want to rant for another, like, half hour about this, but I will say I'm going to give this, like, a light 9 at the moment, I would say. Maybe a high 8. I feel like this DLC is definitely very solid. One of the best things that they've dropped in the last couple years, and certainly the best thing for Victoria 3. The game just feels good, and that is something I've been waiting for a while. So, thank you for watching. Leave your thoughts down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, I guess. And I'll see you next time.